All right, ready to dive into another case.
Absolutely. Always up for a good deep dive.
Today, we're looking into a tragic house fire in West Virginia. Two young boys, Justin Jr. and Delmer Delgado, lost their lives.
Heartbreaking. I imagine those cases are tough to work on.
Yeah. We're going to be using a few different sources to try to piece together what happened. Interview transcripts, investigative reports, and even some audio from the scene.
You're really going all out on this one.
Well, there's a lot to unpack. Our main source is this podcast, Anatomy of Murder. They did a really good episode on it. They talked to the fire marshals, a criminal profiler, even the parents of the victims.
That's pretty comprehensive.
It is, but you know how we do it here. We're going beyond just rehashing what they covered. We're going to analyze everything, look for those details, those little things that might give us a new perspective on this case.
Love that approach. The devil's always in the details, right?
Exactly. So let's start with the scene itself. The podcast gives us a really vivid picture. A mobile home, decorated for Christmas, presents under the tree, the whole works. You know, that time of year when families feel safe and cozy at home.
Yeah, makes the tragedy even more stark.
Right. And this image of the boy's bedroom, devastated by the fire, just this stark contrast with the rest of the home, which was pretty much untouched.
Yeah, that's where the fire marshal comes in, right? I mean, first things first. Got to figure out if this was an accident or something more sinister.
Exactly. And the podcast talks about how the fire marshal meticulously goes through everything, checking the wiring, appliances, anything that could have sparked the fire accidentally.
It's like a giant puzzle, right? You got to rule out all those potential accidental causes before you can even start thinking about arson.
So how do they even tell? I mean, especially after a fire like this, so much damage. How can you tell if someone intentionally set it?
Well, there are a few things they look for. Accelerants, for one. Things like gasoline or kerosene.
Right.
They can analyze the debris, see if there are any traces of those substances, and then there are the burn patterns.
Okay, like how the fire spreads.
Exactly. The way the fire burns, where it starts, how many different points of origin there are. Multiple points, especially in places that don't make sense. That's a big red flag.
Makes sense. So in this case, what did the fire marshal find?
Well, the podcast doesn't give us all the nitty-gritty details, but they do say the fire started in the boys' bedroom, and there were no obvious signs of an accidental cause. So, right away, that raises suspicion.
Okay, so we got a suspicious fire. But where do the parents fit into all of this? Molly and Justin Delgado.
Yeah. And their reactions, those are crucial pieces of the puzzle. The podcast describes them as drastically different.
Right. They say Justin, the father, was just devastated, covered in soot from trying to get to his sons, frantic, just completely understandable reaction. But then there's Molly.
The mother, yeah, I remember that. Much calmer, almost too calm, it seemed. And that always sets off alarm bells for investigators.
I can see why. Let's actually listen to a bit of Justin's account. This is him describing trying to get back into the house. You can hear it in his voice, right? That raw desperation. Just heartbreaking. But then contrast that with Molly's interview. This is her answering questions about their bedtime routine.
Wow. It's like night and day, right?
It is. But we have to remember, everyone grieves differently. There's no one right way to react to something this horrific.
Oh, absolutely.
But investigators are trained to look for inconsistencies, both what people say and how they say it.
Body language, tone of voice, all of that.
Exactly. Any little thing that might suggest deception or, a lack of genuine emotion.
So they're reading between the lines, basically.
Yeah, trying to get a sense of what's really going on.
And then there's this whole thing with the front door. It was locked from the outside. And Justin saying he was trapped inside. Could that have been staged?
That's a question the investigators had to grapple with. It definitely casts doubt on Justin's story, but then there's the physical evidence.
Oh, they talk about Justin having injuries from trying to escape the fire.
So it seems to support his story, but the locked door, it's just strange.
Yeah, a lot of conflicting information right off the bat.
And then, to make things even more complicated, there's this. Well, Molly had actually told a friend about having dreams of harming her children.
Oh, wow. See, now that's something you can't just ignore. Even if it was just a casual conversation, that kind of confession carries a lot of weight.
Right. But does it mean anything for sure? What if it was just a dream? Couldn't it be a sign of something like postpartum depression? I mean, that's a real thing, right?
It is. And that's something investigators would need to look into. Postpartum depression can lead to those kinds of thoughts, feelings of inadequacy.
So it's a possibility, but it doesn't necessarily mean she actually would have hurt them.
Exactly. That's what they have to figure out. Did those feelings, if she was experiencing them, could they have escalated to the point of actually harming her children?
So many questions. Was this a tragic accident or was there something more going on? And how does the locked door fit into all of this? In Justin's account, it's like we're missing crucial pieces of the puzzle.
And this is where the criminal profiler enters the picture. He might be able to help us put those pieces together. So we're left with a lot of suspicion, but not a lot of concrete evidence.
Yeah, like we said, pieces of the puzzle are missing. How do they move forward with a case like this?
That's where the criminal profiler, in this case, Stephen Patrick, that's where his expertise comes in. They bring a whole different perspective, using their knowledge of human behavior to analyze things.
So he's not just looking at the physical evidence. He's trying to get inside Molly's head, figure out what could have motivated her if she was involved.
Exactly. He's looking at those inconsistencies we talked about, what she said in her interview, how she said it, any behavioral clues that might shed some light on things.
And the podcast mentions that Patrick actually suggested a pretty specific approach for the investigators to use during their final interview with Molly.
Oh, yeah, this is where it gets interesting. Instead of going in with a confrontational approach, guns blazing, he suggests they try something else entirely.
What, like be nice to her?
More than that, he tells them to appeal to her maternal instincts.
Interesting. Wouldn't that make her more likely to shut down? Like, if they're being too friendly, wouldn't she just lawyer up and say nothing?
Not necessarily. The idea is to make her feel comfortable, build rapport, remind her of the bond she had with her kids, hope that triggers some kind of emotional response.
So they're thinking it might lead to a confession, or at least get her to reveal something useful.
That's the hope. It's a psychological strategy trying to get past her defenses and appeal to her conscience.
It's kind of like they're trying to make her relive the tragedy, but through a mother's eyes.
Exactly. They're humanizing the victims, hoping to break through that wall of denial, reach the part of her that might still be feeling guilt or remorse.
It's risky, though, right? I mean, too much empathy and she might clam up. Too much pressure and she'll definitely lawyer up.
Oh, absolutely. It's a balancing act. You need to really understand human psychology to pull it off. Adapt to her reactions, like a game of chess, but with emotions.
You mentioned earlier that the case against Molly is largely circumstantial. What exactly does that mean, and why is it important?
Well, circumstantial evidence, it doesn't directly prove something. It's more about inferences, connecting the dots.
So, like if someone saw Molly set the fire, that would be direct evidence.
Right, but in this case, it's more like the locked door, the deleted texts, her behavior. It's all suggestive, but not conclusive.
So it's not a smoking gun, but it all adds up to a picture of what might have happened.
Exactly. And while circumstantial evidence can be very compelling, it can also be tricky. It relies on the jury making those inferences, connecting those dots. And that leaves more room for reasonable doubt.
Okay, so I get that circumstantial evidence can be tough to work with, but how does the profiler help with that?
Well, he helps investigators make those connections stronger, more convincing. Like, for example, he might be able to tie Molly's detached demeanor to a specific psychological profile.
So instead of just saying her behavior is weird, they can say it's consistent with, a certain type of offender.
Right. It gives their interpretation more weight, more credibility. It's like adding those missing puzzle pieces.
So in this case, with so much riding on circumstantial evidence, the profiler's analysis is really crucial.
Absolutely. He helps them understand what might have been going on in Molly's mind, why she might have done what she did if she did it. That's what makes the case stronger.
So what happened in that final interview? Did she confess?
Well, that's the cliffhanger, right? The podcast doesn't tell us, but they do hint at some kind of shocking twist that changes everything.
A twist. Oh, come on, you gotta give me something.
That's all they give us. But we can speculate, can't we? Based on what we know so far, what could that twist be?
All right, let's hear it. What are the possibilities? All right, back for the final part of our deep dive. We've gone through the fire marshal's findings, the parents' reactions, and even brought in the big guns, the profiler.
Yeah, we've got a lot to think about. Suspicious fire, conflicting accounts, a confession to a friend.
And of course, that cliffhanger ending. The podcast doesn't tell us what happened in that final interview with Molly, just hints at a big reveal that changes everything.
Frustrating, but hey, keeps us on the edge of our seats, right?
It does. So even though we don't have the answers, we can at least speculate. What could this shocking twist be?
Well, one possibility, and I think this would be a big one, is that Molly confesses. But her confession, it's not what anyone expects.
Okay, I'm listening.
What if she admits to setting the fire but claims she did it to protect her children from someone else?
Whoa, that's a whole different ballgame. So she's not a cold-blooded killer, she's trying to save her kids. But from who?
That's the big question, right? And I bet that's what the next episode of the podcast focuses on. Could be someone we already know, like Justin. Or maybe it's someone completely new, someone they haven't even mentioned yet.
A whole new layer of mystery. Okay, so that's one possibility. What else could shake things up like that?
All right, how about this? New evidence emerges during the interview, something that completely clears Molly.
Like what? A rock-solid alibi.
Maybe. Or maybe they find some physical evidence that proves she couldn't have done it. Or a witness who places her somewhere else at the time of the fire. Something undeniable.
That would be a real twist. Means everything we thought we knew was wrong.
Exactly. And it throws the whole case wide open. If Molly didn't do it, who did? Was it an accident after all? Or is there a third person involved, someone we haven't even considered?
Man, this is getting more and more complicated. We've got Molly confessing to protect her kids, new evidence that could exonerate her, and now the possibility of a mysterious third party. Anything else you can throw at me?
All right, one more, and this one's a long shot. What if, and hear me out, what if the fire wasn't arson at all? What if it was a genuine accident, something the investigators missed?
Wow, that'd be a huge backpedal for the investigation.
Yeah.
All this time focused on Molly, and it turns out it was just a tragic accident. But what about all the other stuff? Her confession to her friend, the deleted messages, her behavior at the scene.
Well, they have to look at it all through a new lens, wouldn't they? Maybe there are perfectly innocent explanations that fit with the accident theory.
So the confession, the deleted messages, maybe it was all just a coincidence, nothing to do with the fire.
It's possible. It's a reminder that investigations aren't always straightforward. New information can change everything in an instant.
Yeah, it's amazing how one little detail can shift your whole perspective. We started out suspecting Molly, and now we're questioning everything we thought we knew.
That's the thing about these cases. There are always twists and turns. New evidence pops up, witnesses change their stories, and suddenly you're back to square one.
It's a good reminder to be careful about jumping to conclusions, right? Got to keep an open mind.
Absolutely, especially in a case like this with so much emotion involved.
Well, we've explored a few possibilities, but ultimately, we still don't know for sure what that shocking twist is. I guess that's the power of a good cliffhanger. Makes you want to tune in for the next episode.
And if you're really curious, you can always check out the Anatomy of Murder podcast. Just be prepared to be left hanging.
Yeah, fair warning. But that's all we have for this deep dive. A lot to think about, isn't it? The complexities of investigations, the role of psychology, the importance of keeping an open mind.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that truth can be elusive, even with the best efforts of investigators and profilers. Sometimes those questions linger.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Always fascinating to explore these cases with you.
Always a pleasure. Until next time.